December 1944, 1 a.m. A flight of P-51s from the 354th Fighter Group was strafing German columns near Bastogne when flak erupted from a tree line. Lieutenant Blue Ransom's Mustang took a hit. A single shell clipped the radiator right after he destroyed a German gun truck. The Germans were everywhere, flak veilings at every crossroads, half-tracks parked in barns, a king tiger spotted on the N4 that vanished just as quickly. But the worst killer out there wasn't an 88mm cannon. It was a pinhole. Losing coolant fast, Ransom turned for base, praying his engine would hold long enough to see the closest runway. Aircraft mechanic Eli Mercer, a farm-bred wrench from Idaho, heard the first Mustang before he saw it. It was the sound he dreaded most. A Merlin engine that should sing, now rasping like it was gargling gravel. Ship 42103. Jenny Lynn bounced hard onto the steel mat, trailing a comet tail of steam. The pilot, Lieutenant Blue Ransom, kicked open the canopy and tumbled out, his face white as chalk. "Radiator took a kiss outside Huffeleis," he shouted over the dying engine. "I started counting seconds the moment it happened." Eli didn't bother with a salute. He dropped straight into the mud with his flashlight, shoulder deep in the slush, face pressed into the belly scoop. The Mustang's Achilles heel was right there beneath him, the coolant radiator and header tank tucked under the fuselage where every hedge, every pebble, every lucky piece of shrapnel could find it. One crack in that system and the Merlin gave you maybe 5 minutes of flight time. Over the Ardennes in winter, that meant either a long walk through very unfriendly woods or a short fall into a white grave. The crack was obvious enough, an inch-long hairline split on the radiator's solder seam, bubbling green as the last of the ethylene glycol bled out. The right fix was days away. Pull the radiator, resolder it in a workshop that wasn't just a tent, pressure test the whole assembly, then rehang the scoop. But the war wouldn't wait for that. Another squadron was already inbound, low on fuel and even lower on coolant. Eli wiped the seam clean with a rag. He didn't reach for a torch. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a chipped Army-issue bar of hard soap. "Mercer," the crew chief snapped from behind him, "what in hell are you doing?" "Cauterizing," Eli said quietly. The word sounded insane in the frozen air. He rubbed the bar into the crack, like a man trying to erase a pencil mark. The soap scuffed down to paste, then smeared deep into the fissure. He kept rubbing until his knuckles burned, pushing white into green until the bubbling finally slowed. He grabbed a can and dumped precious coolant back into the header tank, then told the pilot to hit the starter and taxi forward 5 yards. Warm coolant sluiced through the seam, hit the soap, and cooked it like a crust. The leak stopped, not sealed forever, just sealed enough. "Get her airborne," Eli said, standing up and brushing mud off his knees. "Don't climb hard. Don't jerk the throttle. 30 minutes if you baby her. Maybe 40 if you pray." Blue Ransom stared at the bar of soap in Eli's hand like it was some kind of witchcraft. "You sure about this?" "I grew up nursing cracked tractor radiators 30 miles from the nearest town," Eli replied. "Boiling water makes fat soap swell. It swells just enough to get you to a real wrench." 2 more Mustangs limped in within the hour. One from the 352nd out of Bodny that had diverted after the radiator took a pebble over Malmedy. Another from the 361st, escorting fortresses that turned southeast to dodge weather and found flak instead. Same wound, same death clock ticking down. Eli repeated the ritual with both: scrape, smear, refill, warm. He gave them all the same instructions. Hold manifold pressure steady, keep the nose low, watch that coolant temperature like it's your own pulse. A78 to A84 Ash is 40 kilometres, he told them. "You've got about 60 if you behave yourself. Land there, they've got solder and heat. We've got soap and hope." By lunchtime, 3 soap-patched Mustangs lifted off one by one, white frost coating their wings, green smears on their bellies where antifreeze had met a bar stolen from somebody's wash kit. Over the radio came a calm voice. "Florenz, this is Jenny Lynn. Coolant steady, power set, feet wet over the Meuse." Eli didn't smile. He was already under another belly scoop, digging fat into a new crack with raw fingers, while the bulge howled just miles away, and the timeline to engine seizure ran through his head like a slow, terrible stopwatch. He didn't call it a fix. He called it a reprieve. That afternoon, the 354th's Operations Board added a new line under remarks. Soap patch, temp seal, ESD, 30 to 60 km. The pilot started calling it the idiot's trick. The first one, who made it all the way to A84 alive, raised a bottle to the idiot back at Floraine and swore he'd never laugh at laundry soap again. Eli Mercer tucked a fresh bar into his pocket. 37 times before the thaw came, he would reach for it and tell a dying Mustang it gets to live one more half hour. December 24th, 1944. Florenz Airfield, Belgium. Morning frost coated the pierced steel planking like broken glass. Mechanics moved through the mist like ghosts, breath fogging in the air, hands bleeding into their gloves. The Battle of the Bulge was still raging just 50 miles east, and I2 Tactical Air Command was flying 3 sorties a day. Close support for the 101st Airborne at Bastogne, rail cuts near St. Vith, convoy strikes anywhere the roads weren't choked with snow or bodies. The 354th's P-51 Mustangs kept coming home wounded. Every single mission, same story. Radiators hit by shrapnel, pebbles or frozen mud, kicked up from the runway. A single puncture in that belly scoop radiator and the Merlin engine was dead within minutes. Not in theory. In cold. Reality. 7 to 10 minutes if you throttled back and didn't climb. Less if you pushed it. The coolant ran out, the temperature spiked past 250 degrees Celsius, bearings seized up, pistons scuffed against cylinder walls, and the crankshaft locked solid. Any pilot who didn't bail out in time died when the prop stopped and the Mustang either flipped on landing or burned up mid-air. Command knew about the problem. They'd logged 27 engine losses in the last month alone. No visible battle damage, just leaks. They'd ordered replacement radiators from England, but those wouldn't arrive until mid-January at the earliest. The war wouldn't wait that long. Eli Mercer didn't look like anyone's idea of a saviour. He was 26 years old, built like a barn beam, with hands too rough for any wrench to slip through. He'd been a motor pool mechanic since before the war started. Tractors, trucks, engines that ran on prayers and spit. He'd learned early on that soap fills cracks better than solder when heat and water do the rest of the work. Out here on the line, there was no time for theory. There was only triage. Word about the soap trick spread down the dispersal line faster than any official memo ever could. By 0800 hours, there was a queue of wounded Mustangs lined up in front of Mercer's hard stand, ships with names painted on their noses like Junebug, Little Audrey, Miss Dallas, and Texas Belle. Every single one of them bleeding green. Eli worked without any ceremony. Cowl flaps open, hands deep in the scoop, flashlight clenched between his teeth. The method was always exactly the same. Clean the seam with whatever was handy, a rag, a brush, even a glove if that's all you had. Scrape the soap bar until it warmed up from friction. Rub it hard into the leak until the bubbling slowed down, until it stopped completely, until that thin film of glycol hissed and then hardened. Top off the tank, hand the pilot his luck back, and move on to the next one. The first officers to trust the fix were desperate men, captains with kill marks painted on their cowls, who knew damn well the odds of flying another sortie on a cracked radiator were exactly 0 without some kind of miracle. They took off low and careful, nursing the throttles like newborns. And every single time one of them came back trailing steam but still alive, the myth grew a little stronger. At noon, Major Carl Dwyer, commanding officer of the 355th Fighter Squadron, walked across the line carrying a clipboard. He was sceptical, the way all officers were trained to be. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that you're sealing combat radiators with bath soap." "Not telling you, sir," Eli answered without looking up. "Showing you." Dwyer pointed at a P-51 that had just landed. Sally B coolant was dripping steadily from the chin, hissing when it hit the cold tarmac. Mercer slid underneath, wiped the crack clean, then rubbed a thick line of yellow soap straight across it. He watched it foam up and seal as the engine kept idling. He tapped the gauge with his wrench. Coolant temperature steady, pressure rising back up. "Half an hour," Eli said flatly. "Maybe 40 minutes if she's feeling generous. Enough to get her home, not enough to make it to Berlin." Dwyer crouched down beside him and studied the patch up close. It looked completely absurd. An inch of greenish paste sealing a precision-built, liquid-cooled engine that cost as much as a decent house back home. But the numbers didn't lie. Over 30 Mustangs grounded in the past week alone could have been saved with that one bar of soap. He wrote something in his notebook and left without saying another word. By dusk, the entire line crew had adopted the trick. Every toolbox on the field now carried a bar, ivory, lifebuoy, palmolive, anything that would melt and swell under heat. Pilots started making jokes about it around the mess hall. "You want altitude, you better pack soap." The phrase became gallows humour around the dispersal hut, the kind of joke you made when the alternative was thinking too hard about what could go wrong. That night, the temperature dropped well below zero. The soap froze solid in the toolboxes. Mercer discovered that coal bars didn't spread worth a damn, so he started keeping a few tucked in his jacket pocket against his chest to keep them soft and workable. He called them his combat patches. When the other mechanics teased him about it, he just shrugged it off. "Better than trying to weld something with your bare fingers," he'd say. December 25th, Christmas morning. The squadron mess hall served thin coffee and powdered eggs that tasted like cardboard. Nobody felt particularly festive, but at 0900 hours the radio crackled to life with an unexpected transmission. A Mustang from the 353rd, coolant completely gone, reporting from 30 miles out. Everyone expected to hear a Mayday call. Instead, the pilot's voice stayed perfectly calm. "Applied field patch per Florena's procedure. Coolant holding, returning on reduced power." Florena's procedure. It was unofficial, completely unsanctioned by any manual, but it was already becoming doctrine. By noon, 3 more pilots reported the exact same thing: soap-sealed leaks, engines holding pressure. The maintenance log started tracking the results in the remarks column, entry after entry. Aircraft 42987, coolant loss, field repair, soap, returned safely. Recommend continuation of procedure. Aircraft 43122, hit by debris, radiator crack, soap plug, held for 40 minutes. Eli kept his own count on the back of an empty ration box. "One more saved," he'd mutter to himself each time another one made it back. By the end of Christmas Day, there were 9 tick marks scratched in pencil. 9 men who didn't have to parachute into enemy snow or freeze to death in some foxhole waiting for capture. Up the chain of command, an engineering officer sent a cable to an IJTAC headquarters. Request evaluation of field sealing compound improvised by Sergeant E. Mercer. Unofficially effective. Unofficial or not, it was already saving airplanes faster than the brass could even think to question it. The P-51, that sleek killer of the European sky, symbol of Allied air superiority, was surviving on bars of soap. And Eli knew it. Every single time he rubbed a fresh bar across a wound in aluminum, he whispered the same line to himself, half prayer and half joke. "Hold together, sweetheart. Just 30 more minutes." December the 27th, 1944. Snow drifted hard against the revetments at Florène, muffling the constant clang of tools and the cough of cold engines trying to start. The front lines hadn't moved much, but the war itself hadn't slowed down one bit. The Mustangs still flew every day, armed to the teeth, overloaded with fuel, and hungry for targets. And every sortie meant more cracked radiators, more trails of steam, more desperate emergency landings. By now, the soap trick wasn't just rumour anymore, it had become ritual. Mechanics carried bars in their breast pockets right next to their notebooks and favourite wrenches. Pilots talked about it in the mess tents like it was folklore passed down through generations. If you spring a leak, throttle down immediately, rub in the soap, and pray to whoever you believe in. Nobody knew exactly how it worked on a chemical level. They only knew that it did work. Eli Mercer had no time whatsoever to explain the chemistry behind it. He just understood the basic logic of heat and pressure. The Merlin's coolant system ran at 15 pounds per square inch. At that pressure, even a pinhole would turn liquid coolant to vapour in seconds flat. The soap, once rubbed firmly into a crack, softened up from the hot glycol flowing past it, then hardened again as it cooled down slightly, forming a temporary scab over the wound. The coolant's own heat cooked it into place, sealing things just long enough to get the bird back home. The hotter it got, the tighter it sealed itself. Simple physics, really. But theory didn't matter one damn bit when there was a war raging just outside the hangar doors. The morning shift began with a frozen sun barely visible through the clouds and some very bad news over the radio. 2 P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group had gone down over the Schnee Eifel after taking radiator hits during a strafing run. No time for patches. No time for luck. Both pilots lost. Eli stared hard at the flight board on the wall and clenched his fists tight. "That's what this is for," he muttered to nobody in particular. Not to fix things permanently, just to buy enough time. He started experimenting with the mixture. The standard Army soap rations were unpredictable at best. Some bars crumbled apart in the cold. Others melted way too fast under heat. So he started mixing them together. He melted down shavings from 3 different brands in an empty tin can, added just a little glycerin, borrowed from the medical tent, and stirred the whole mess with a screwdriver until it cooled down to a soft, waxy paste. He called it radiator butter. When applied properly to a crack, it spread smoother than regular soap, hardened slower, and sealed considerably tighter. His crew laughed out loud the first time he said the name. "You're cooking now?" "Yeah," he grinned back, "cooking up flight time." That same afternoon, a formation of Mustangs from the 370th Fighter Group diverted emergency to Florens, 4 ships trailing visible vapour trails. They'd been hit by concentrated flak near Prüm. The lead aircraft, Sweet Deidre, landed hot with coolant actively hissing from the scoop. Eli ran underneath the fuselage before the propeller even stopped turning. He spotted a fine crack in the lower tank seam, typical damage pattern. He smeared the radiator butter on thick with a putty knife, then signalled hard for the engine to restart. Within seconds, the bubbling stopped completely. Steam turned to mist. Mist faded to nothing at all. "Throttle up slowly," he yelled over the engine noise. The pilot brought the Merlin up to 1800 RPM. The gauge steadied right out. Pressure held solid. Eli slapped the metal belly with his glove and stepped back, satisfied with the work. "Good for how long?" the pilot called down from the cockpit. "Half an hour for sure, maybe more if you baby her properly. Keep that nose down and watch the temperature gauge like a hawk." "Half an hour'll do just fine." The Mustang lifted off again, patched and trembling, but very much alive. Another one followed right behind it, then a third. 3 more tick marks scratched onto Eli's ration box that evening. That night, a captain from Nyack's Air Service Command made the trip out to visit the flight line. His name was Donnelly, an engineer by training and education, clipboard permanently attached to his hand, face set in professional skepticism. He'd heard all about the so-called miracle fix and wanted concrete proof. "Soap isn't rated for pressure containment," he stated flatly. You're risking catastrophic blowback, potential fire, maybe serious engine damage. Eli wiped his hands slowly on a rag, taking his time. Sir, with all due respect, we're risking pilots freezing to death in German snow right now. Pick your gamble. Donnelly didn't argue the point. Instead, he ordered a proper test. 2 P-51 radiators were set up side by side on wooden sawhorses in the maintenance hangar, one patched traditionally with solder, one sealed with Eli's soap mixture. Both were filled completely with water and pressurized using a hand pump. At 15 psi, the solder held perfectly, exactly as expected. So did the soap patch. At 20 psi, both assemblies began to weep slightly at the seams. Donnelly watched the gauge needle closely. At 25 psi, the solder joint suddenly burst wide open, spraying water clear across the hangar floor. The soap patch bulged outward, visibly, but stayed completely sealed, soft and pliant under the pressure. How is that even possible? Donnelly asked, genuinely confused. Eli just shrugged. Because it flexes with the metal. Solder's proud and rigid. Soap's humble and gives when it needs to. The officer left the hangar shaking his head in disbelief, but the very next morning, mechanics from 2 other squadrons showed up specifically asking for the butter recipe. Eli gave it to them, written out on a scrap of cardboard in pencil. Field seal compound, type S. 3 parts hard soap, any brand. 1 part glycerin heat together until soft and uniform. Apply by hand or spatula directly to crack. Refill coolant system. Run engine to operating temperature to cure seal. Effective range, 30-60 kilometers flight distance under moderate power settings. By December the 29th, 21 different aircraft had flown home successfully on Mercer's soap patches. Some only made it 20 minutes before needing a real repair. Others held for 45 minutes or more. One Mustang, hit badly over Malmedy, actually flew nearly a full hour before finally landing safely at St. Trond. The brass up at headquarters still called the whole thing unorthodox field practice. The pilots just called it a straight-up miracle. In the freezing cold of that Belgian winter, Eli just called it what it was, a patch job. He knew perfectly well it wouldn't win the war by itself. But each bar of soap tucked in his coat pocket meant one more pilot who wouldn't freeze to death in some Belgian field. One more Mustang saved and ready for tomorrow's fight. When a young mechanic asked him once why he bothered keeping count of every single repair, Eli said simply, "Because every tick mark on that box represents a man who didn't die because of a leak." That night, he scratched the latest mark onto his ration box. 37 lines now, crowded together. The box was almost completely full, and the war still wasn't anywhere close to over. December 30th, 1944. The last clear morning of the entire year. The air over Florence was knife-cold and sharp, the horizon nothing but a blur of smoke and frozen haze. The sky hummed constantly with Merlin engines. P-51s from the 354th and 370th Fighter Groups were launching into the grey for yet another strike mission near Bastogne. Eli Mercer stood outside the line shack, watching them lift off one by one, the smell of hot glycol and burnt oil thick enough to taste on his tongue. He didn't see airplanes anymore when he looked at them. He saw hours, minutes, seconds. Every single flight was just a countdown until another radiator inevitably burst. The line chief, Sergeant Vic, came running down the steel planks with his clipboard flapping. "4 coming back already," he shouted over the engine noise. "1 steaming heavy. ETA 10 minutes. Eli was already reaching for his gloves before Vic finished the sentence. The soap bars in his pocket had worn down to nothing but stubs now. He kept them there anyway, for warmth and for luck. The first Mustang, Mary Jane II, landed extremely hot, trailing a ghost-white plume of vapour behind it. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio frequency, tight with controlled panic. Pressure reading 0. Engine still turning, but barely. coming in dead stick. The propeller slowed gradually, coasted for a few more rotations, then stopped completely. The aircraft rolled to a stop right at the edge of the steel mat. Before the pilot had even climbed out of his cockpit, Eli was already underneath the fuselage on his back. The damage was small, but absolutely fatal. A shell splinter, thin as a pencil, punched straight through the radiator seam. The tank hissed like an angry kettle. Eli wiped it dry as best he could with a rag, then smeared his last remaining chunk of radiator butter over the damaged line. The hissing slowed down gradually, then stopped altogether. He refilled the system with cold water from a jerry can, slapped the cowl twice with his palm, and signalled the pilot to try starting up. The Merlin coughed once, twice, then caught and settled into a steady idle. The pressure gauge crept slowly up to 10 psi and held there. The pilot leaned out of the cockpit, staring down in disbelief. "You're actually kidding me right now. That's really going to hold?" "Long enough to matter," Eli said, standing up and brushing off his knees. "You've got 40 kilometres left in her, maybe more if you're lucky. If she starts leaking again mid-flight, climb as high as you can, throttle way back, and glide it in. Don't panic. Just let the heat do its work." By this point, half the mechanics on the entire base had personally witnessed the trick in action. Nobody laughed about it anymore. They just worked faster and kept their mouths shut. Soap had become standard issue equipment. Bars were carefully cut into quarters, wrapped tight in oiled paper, and stored in the cockpit map case of every ferry ship heading out. Pilots had started calling it the Mercer bar, with genuine affection. Some of them even rubbed a small piece into their gloves before every single mission, just for luck. Word continued spreading well beyond Florence. Over the radio nets, ground crews at other bases traded notes and tips. "You got Mercer's fix yet?" "Yeah, we're running the butter mix now." By the time New Year's Day rolled around, 3 more airfields, St. Trond, Ash and Le Culot, were all actively using the technique. But not everyone up the chain was happy about it. That afternoon, an inspection jeep rolled up to the line. Captain Leonard Rhodes, 9TAC maintenance officer, stepped out with his clipboard already in hand. "Who exactly authorised field modifications to the P-51 cooling system?" he demanded. Eli wiped his hands off and pointed straight up at the grey sky. "They did, sir." Rhodes didn't even crack a smile. "You're not authorised to alter standard maintenance procedures in any way. Soap isn't a rated sealing compound. It's an unknown material under operational pressure. You do realise that if that plug blows apart during flight, it could explode hot coolant all over the pilot. Correct?" Eli shrugged his shoulders. "If I don't seal it at all, sir, there won't be a pilot left to worry about." The captain ordered an immediate demonstration. Eli obliged without complaint. They found a damaged radiator in the scrap pile, one with a hairline crack near the lower tank. He filled it completely with water, patched it properly with soap, and set it near a warming stove to simulate actual engine heat. Within 1 minute flat, the leak stopped dead. Steam curled upward, then hardened into a white crust. The radiator held pressure for 30 full minutes straight, before a slow drip finally reappeared. Rhodes just stared at it. 30 minutes, he said quietly. Eli nodded once. "That's 30 minutes of actual flight time, sir. 30 miles of open sky. Maybe a life or two saved." The officer let out a long breath and closed his notebook. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing. But don't write any of this down officially. If it works the way you say it does, it'll find its way up the chain on its own." It did exactly that. Within just a few days, the soap patch technique was in active use from St. Trond all the way to Chivres. Mechanics carried bars in their toolkits right beside their wrenches and spark plug sockets. Pilots briefed each other on the procedure before every mission. Throttle back immediately. Maintain coolant temperature below 250 degrees. And pray hard to the god of laundry and luck. Then came the real test of everything they'd learned. January 1st, 1945. Operation Bodenplatte. the Luftwaffe's absolute last gasp. At dawn, German fighters roared in low across the frozen Ardennes, strafing every Allied airfield they could reach. Florenz took a direct hit. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s tearing down the flight line with guns blazing at everything that moved. Bombs fell short of the main hangars, ripping massive holes in the pierced steel planking. Fire spread quickly among the parked aircraft. Mechanics dove desperately for cover in the nearest crater. Eli Mercer didn't. He was already running full sprint toward the nearest P-51, Texas Bell, with its pilot still half climbing into the cockpit. "Go!" Eli shouted over the chaos. "Get her up now!" A 20mm shell clipped the Mustang's belly scoop, shearing completely through the lower panel. Steam gushed out under pressure. The pilot cursed loudly, ready to abandon the aircraft entirely. Eli grabbed a bar of soap from his coat, dove underneath the fuselage, and pressed it hard into the ragged hole, his hands burning from the scalding heat. The crack sizzled violently, bubbled up and sealed tight with an angry hiss. "Throttle up hard," he yelled at the top of his lungs. The pilot gunned the engine without hesitation. The Mustang roared forward down,